Good morning. I'm Dante Ang, President and CEO of the Manila Times. We're here with a roundtable interview with Attorney Joseph Estrada, not the former president, but the managing director of Cocopea, and we're going to talk about education.
Hi, good morning, Dante, and to all your followers and readers, and also viewers of the Manila Times TV.
Thank you for joining us today. Attorney Estrada, before we start, perhaps we should remind people what all of the alphabet soup stands for. You represent Cocopea, but Cocopea also represents a number of associations. Could you just briefly tell us about your organization?
Yeah, Cocopea stands for the Coordinating Council of Private Educational Associations. This is said to be the voice of private education in the Philippines. This is like a federation or the umbrella organization of all educational associations in the country, but only on the private education sector. So from basic education to higher education, including tech voc institutes, and the members are the following: the five national associations also in education, and these are the Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines, or the CAP. These are the Catholic educational institutions all over the country. You have the Philippine Association of Colleges and Universities, or PACU. These are the non-sectarian proprietary educational institutions all over the country, mostly higher educational institutions. And you have the Philippine Association of Private Schools, Colleges, and Universities, or PAPSCU, where the Manila Times College is also a member. It is composed of community schools all over the country, from basic education to higher education also. Then you have the Association of Christian Schools, Colleges, and Universities, or ACSCU. These are the Christian schools all over the country also. Then you have the TechVoc Schools Association of the Philippines, or TVSA, and these are all the Tech Voc institutes all over the country.
Thank you, Attorney. Just for disclosure, as Attorney Estrada said, Manila Times College is part of POPSCO. In fact, I represent our college on the POPSCO board, and the POPSCO now is the organization that's now taking its turn as chairman of Cocopea. And Attorney Estrada is, by the way, also the corporate counsel of the Manila Times. But this is not about us. It's about education. Maybe, Attorney Estrada, give us the state of the education sector right now. We are beginning the first day of GCQ in Metro Manila, but things are pretty much still on hold in the education sector. But how is the sector right now?
Well, the education sector is struggling. It is actually, when the ECQ started, I would say the education is in a perfect storm. It's in a very challenging position because, as you know, even prior to the ECQ and the COVID-19 national emergency, the education sector has already been beset with a lot of problems, particularly on quality, based on the results of the PISA, problems on access, and all of those issues. There's also on the decline of enrollment in private education, declining role also of private education. And then suddenly the COVID-19 happened, and now everything is urgent, and we all have to address all of these issues. And access problem now has moved towards, has evolved to a different issue. It's no longer classrooms and teachers, but now access to other modes, except for physical presence in the schools. So today, this is actually very important for the educators, because today and tomorrow, a lot of the school personnel will be going back to the schools to do the preparation for the school opening, which will happen between today and August 24. for both public and for the private education sector, because the public sector will open in basic education will open in August 24. For higher education, it can actually open anytime depending on their academic calendar that they have set.
Yeah, your group Cocopea issued a statement earlier about the economic losses. It cited some figures. Um, could you share with us those figures again?
Yeah, the economic losses
Impact.
and the impact on the higher education sector is really serious, and we're actually computing it based on the loss of revenue losses from last academic year, and also the continuing losses because of the delay in the school opening. So we're actually just looking at around 30 billion worth of losses for the entire sector per month of delay.
Per month.
So yeah, per month of delay. So we're already now suffering losses because, as you know, it's already been delayed. If we open in August for basic education, and also for higher education, if we don't open as soon as possible.
Well, and how are the private schools coping? Have there been reports of schools furloughing its teachers and other employees? Are they on a no work no pay arrangement? What have you heard from some of the private schools? What's going on?
Yeah, definitely, because of the economic impact on the education institutions, the hardest hit are the school personnel, because 70% of the budget and the cost of running the school goes to salaries of school personnel. I can say uh, all of them are affected. The all school personnel, we have around 300,000 in basic education and around 100,000 in higher education faculty. I would say all of them are affected. They're under they are either on a reduced pay or on a no work no pay, starting from March up to the present.
Right, and I think people may be surprised to realize that not all of the private schools in the Philippines are thriving. In fact, even before this health crisis and the economic fallout, many of them have been struggling for a long time with many things, including the transition to the K to 12 system. Could you elaborate on that, Nano?
Yeah, that's very accurate. The private education has been struggling even before the COVID-19, simply because it relies mostly on tuition of the parents, and those who are also suffering from financial difficulties. Of course, they have difficulty in sending their children to a private education, and and actually, even before the COVID-19, year in year out, the private education suffers a decline of around 25% in its enrollment, and that is prior to COVID. So we're looking at the worst case scenario of between 30 to 50% in the decline of enrollment this academic year, for combination of reasons, not only for economic reasons, because some parents also have intimated that they're not willing and ready to send their kids back to school, whether it's online or offline. They're skipping the school year this upcoming academic year. So we're dealing with that, and definitely we need government intervention, because the private education sector cannot do this alone in order to survive.
Yeah, you mentioned the students, and of course that is the other side of the coin in this subject. One group that is affected, of course, as you said, are the teachers and the personnel of the schools. What has been the impact besides the fact that there will be a drop in enrollment? What has been the impact so far on the student side? You know, given the fact that many of them have been recipients of some government subsidies, including the voucher program, but they have had to stop because schools are closed because of the pandemic.
Yeah, the social impact on the students is also tremendous, and it affects them and their families if we'll have a prolonged suspension or delay in the school opening, or if we scrap the entire school year altogether. Based on my observation, if we start later than August, so September onwards, that would effectively would make us lose one academic year. Because if you start in September and over the regular 10-month school year, you'll end by June. So effectively, the next we will be pushing forward the school years. And based on the based of one economic modeling study, I think by National University of Singapore, also with our own ADB here, a delay in one school year for students is equated to 10% of future earnings of the family.
Wow.
So this has great impact, and the impact is also seen at various levels depending on the age of the students. Like for example, those who are near graduate or near finishing senior high school, um, stopping for the year may be an option, and probably they'd be exploring work after that and not pursuing further education, even college. And this will delay their capabilities also for them to take care of themselves, and they'll be passing on the parents will be passing on the burden to them. So this really creates a tremendous social impact on the families. And also when kids are in the school, if we're talking about the younger pupils and students, especially for public education, if they will not be attending school, they will be at home, and the parents will be left to take care of them, not being able to go to work. And some families also rely on the free food, from
Mm.
the public education
School
and
meals, breakfast.
school meals. Yeah. So all of these things, we're looking at this. So definitely, this is beyond labor problems and viability of schools. We're looking at serious economic and social impact to our country, and of course, the economy. We want also to contribute to efforts to bring back our economy in shape. And we think that in all of the plans to come up with stimulus packages, economic stimulus packages, we feel that education should be part of that.
Well, and just to be very clear, the president mentioned earlier that there should be, or his preference is that there should not be classes while there is a health crisis going on. So no classes, no vaccine. Just to be clear, Cocopea is not entirely against that. Is that correct? Is that a correct understanding of your position?
Once it was already clarified that what the president was referring to was physical or residential
Physical
learning in
attendance.
campus. We have no problem with that because, as I always say, the schools are preparing for school opening under the flexible learning options, and the physical reporting is actually dependent or contingent on whatever the government would say, especially our health experts. We're not ready to compromise the safety and health of our students also.
So your position is congruent with the president's, that you're also concerned about the safety of students in a
Right.
face-to-face class arrangement. That's correct?
Right. Definitely, we are on the same page as regards physical or residential learning of the students.
But Cocopea's position is that classes can continue under what you said earlier, under alternative modes of learning. Could you elaborate on what is possible in the Philippines? Because everybody knows that, I drive along Roas Boulevard, and there are patches of Roas Boulevard that has, weak cell phone signal. But how is the education sector planning for these alternative modes? I remember reading in the Manila Times that Secretary Briones is even talking about, using radio, traditional media, I suppose like TV as part of the package of new approaches. But could you elaborate on the private sector side, what you guys are preparing for?
Yeah, when we talk about flexible learning options, this include any delivery mode that would not require physical presence of the students inside the classroom, or a combination of different modalities.
Mm,
All right. So there's also a subcategory, the synchronous mode and the asynchronous mode. When we say synchronous, it's like all the students are still attending all at the same time the classes,
I
but
see.
it will be under online or whatever, or other modes of video conferencing. Asynchronous, this includes whatever modular deliveries. It doesn't require students to be learning all at the same time. So basically, this includes offline and online delivery mode. So it's not really focused on online or those which require internet connectivity. It can be, for example, in one school, they have put in place pick up points and drop off points for the school and for the students to pick up learning materials, textbook, instructions from the teachers, for the parents to pick up, and also to submit the accomplished task of their students. And this is completely offline. So, and it was also mentioned about the use of government TV, radio. These are actually very good access points for the students. But definitely that TV or radio use uh, should be supplemented by other modalities that would allow interaction with the learner and the teacher, because in the TV program it will be one way, unless
All
it's
right.
like a reality TV, right, where it asks for a text response. So all of these things, but we're like in other countries, like even in other countries who are more advanced than us, more economically advanced than us, they've not completely removed the face-to-face learning, but they're preparing for social distancing, use of wide spaces, etc. And they have started with planning for the higher age groups when they required the students to come back. So I think for us, it's very hard also to sustain a fully online or a fully distance learning for a long time. Probably we'll have to wait for the vaccine, but hopefully it comes soon or sooner. The Deputy Secretary said the earliest is 10 months from now. So probably we'll do some planning based on that schedule. But definitely the Philippines would not be able to sustain this for long term, like
Yeah.
what we have seen also in other countries.
Yeah, I know from again my personal experience, because my son during, I think, the second semester of the existing school year, the lockdown had of course impacted classes, because they were suspended, and they continued the semester through online. So some of these things that you're mentioning have are being tried out, or are being tried out as we speak. And what is your feedback so far from the private sector? How is it coming along, and what are some of the difficulties they're experiencing and will probably experience when the new academic year begins?
Yeah, last academic year, some schools or still, especially the higher education institutions, they were still in the middle of their of the academic year. Some are midterm, some are in the final term.
Like your
So
son at LaSalle, right?
yeah,
Your
right,
sons, I
right.
should say. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So for this school, they have to close the academic year using online
Mm,
mode. But because of some difficulty and some issues also with parents, a lot of the schools were also forced to cut short the academic year. So, and then those issues, interconnectivity, online capabilities, readiness of the parents, readiness of the homes to move towards this new normal of delivery of education. These are issues once again in the reopening of the schools. So, but I think it has also opened a lot of awareness on these issues that we have not realized before when the flexible learning options were viewed as alternative to formal education. So now it will be the mainstream, and I think it will be a privilege, or the alternative mode will be the with the physical delivery mode.
Have you heard of some schools maybe promoting their own version of homeschooling? I suppose that's sort of an extension of what we're talking about. Have you heard of some schools coming up with their own package, given that a lot of students are unable to leave home? Is that something that's going to be an opportunity for some schools to offer?
Yeah, before this COVID-19, homeschooling is an alternative, and for some parents, they feel that they can take care of the education of their children at a very young age, and before they are allowed to go into formal education in the educational institutions, but only a very small portion or population of students and families are into that, but a lot of the parents now are asking for that, and because of that, it somehow also evolved. It's now there's some policies being looked into before parents can go into homeschooling, which for me also defeats the homeschooling if
Mm,
the government would be regulating that, because education is the primary responsibility of the parents. Let's not forget that. It is merely delegated to the government. So that homeschooling, that should remain as an option, actually, with COVID or no COVID. But that is also now being looked into. But if we're looking at a participation of the educational institutions, then it's not really strictly homeschooling. If the school will be developing would be developing the learner materials, they would be participating with the parents, and the parents will facilitate the learning at home, but they would not be able to do it without the help of the school. Then that's different. It's not really strictly homeschooling, but it falls under the flexible learning options.
right. So, and related to that also, I was reading last week that the public school system, I think less than half of them, but if I remember correctly, around 44 or 45% are ready for some digital mode of learning. What is the state of readiness for private schools? The general impression, of course, is that because private schools have more resources, that they are more equipped, they're more connected. But is that the case, the actual case?
Well, only around 60% of the schools, based on their
Private
own survey
schools.
of their own communities also. But this was done around April, so I think
Mm.
it would increase because of the preparations that are being made underway.
Mm. And of course, there are costs. I mean, so for the other 40% who need that infrastructure now because of the health crisis, has there been a Cocopea appeal or representation and maybe government assistance to equip? I'm not even sure if that's possible because I suppose that depends on the location of the school, whether the town itself or the
Mhm.
province is connected and has electricity and all of that stuff.
Yeah, Cocopea is in dialogue with various levels of the government in terms of capabilities of the students to go into online, and also for their connectivity needs. So with IATF, we had this presentation, and we asked at least for government to mediate or intervene with the private telecoms companies to provide free access to internet or reduced rates so that we can offer this to the students, or even provide for mobile data packages, budget for laptops, gadgets, and other equipment. So we're asking for these things. And actually, there's a law. We have two important legislation that's already in place, and we just have to implement this in a wider scale. First is the Public Internet Act. I think this was 2 years ago, which requires putting in place connectivities in public areas. And we also have the Open Distance Learning Act, which actually uh, provides subsidy for students and even teachers for equipment, laptops, and gadgets. So we're talking to the executive through the IATF and also to some legislators to sponsor a bill on this matter.
And what was the reaction of the IATF and the legislatures that you talked to? What did they say to you? Did they commit anything?
Well, they agree to our position, but again, the major problem remains the budget,
Funding. Yeah.
the funding. So I think the Congress is looking at some funds from last year to realign to the critically affected sectors, including education.
Right. And speaking of funding, a number of Filipino students, both in basic ed and in colleges and universities, they receive a subsidy through a voucher. Is that going to continue in the academic year, given that um, students will stay home? I know some of the subsidies were for other things besides tuition, such as transportation and cost of textbooks and other learning materials. Any word from the government about whether or not those will continue under this distance learning arrangement that we're adopting in the meantime?
Yeah, actually now the budget for the all of these government subsidies shall continue, but um, some were delayed. Releases were delayed due for last academic year because we also learned that these budgets were initially targeted for realignment during the first ECQ, but we were assured also that that this will continue for the students, at least for settling their accounts for last academic year. But for this coming school year, we're hoping for the best. And not only for continuing the government subsidies, but we're also looking into expanding these subsidies to other students who are not initially grantees, but nonetheless are economically affected by the ECQ. So um, there's a specific bill now. This is the PESA bill in Congress at the lower house. This is now under the Committee on Economic Affairs, chaired by Congresswoman Sharon Garin, on the bills authored by Congressman Salceda and Congressman Stella Kimbo. And they're actually now, probably as we speak, this is being approved at the second reading at the plenary of Congress. So in that economic stimulus bill, we were able to have these authors include the expansion of the various government subsidies. So for tertiary education subsidy, this is for higher education, we're looking at additional 18 billion budget to increase the slots to cover the 1.7 million higher education students who were not initially included as grantees last year, and also expansion of the ESC, senior high school vouchers in basic education. Again, to those who were not included but nonetheless are economically adversely affected, so around 15 billion. So hopefully this will be approved before Congress adjourns, and so that the Senate can also take this up and approve a similar economic stimulus bill. We're also working with with senators like Senator Recto, Senator Angara, Senator Win Gatchalian. They also support similar expansion of government subsidies for students.
And what are the challenges in getting those measures passed? What have been some of the concerns you've been hearing or the opposition that you've been hearing?
The usual clarifications would be, um, of course, the no increase in tuition, and making sure that these subsidies will go directly to the needs of the students for their payment of tuition, and also for the benefit of the school personnel. And those are the usual. And of course, I think the major challenge would be funding again, because you have also other critically affected sectors who are also now asking for government support to help them also get back
Yeah,
operations.
when you speak about funding and the budget in the Philippines, there's a provision in our constitution that says that the education sector should get the highest share of the national budget. But why should the private sector benefit from that? Why should it not be just limited to the public school system?
Yeah, the education is a public good. It is a public service. We are very consistent in advocating for that. So whether it is delivered under the public school system or the private education system, education remains to be a public good, and it deserves government funding. And by the way, when we talking about funding, we are able to our government is able to comply with that constitutional requirement that education should have the highest budgetary provision,
Allocation.
no,
Yeah.
in the allocation in the General Appropriations Act. But now comparing our spending and allocation for COVID-related expenses, I was looking at this in the internet. We're actually sixth in the ASEAN in terms of spending on COVID-related matters. So we're lagging behind. We're only up from Timor-Leste,
Oh wow.
Cambodia in terms of spending. So I think we have to do better in that respect.
Mm. And the Constitution also mentions the private sector playing a complementary role. What is that about?
Yeah, there's this constitutional provision that recognizes the complementary role of the public and the private educational institutions. And so, because of that, we are given this mandate of reasonable regulation and academic freedom. But this complementary role of private education, I think this has yet to be fully operationalized, because this means that private education, being given that role, should be able to thrive in whatever circumstances we have in the country. It should be able to thrive and should be able to provide the distinct brand of its education, and also to complement the efforts of the government in the aspect of delivery of education where public education is limited.
Hmm. Yeah, I know what you mean, but some people seem to have a different view of that, especially as you mentioned when you talk about tuition increases. I know from personal experience that it's expensive to run a school, and in fact, our school is among those that are struggling. But uh, there seems to be a perception that when you think about private schools, that they're all like LaSalle's or like Ateneos or USTs, but vast majority of private schools are actually um, are struggling even before the pandemic.
Yeah, the government actually saves a lot of money when it even when it supports or funds private education, because again private education complements that education service. we have 27 million learners in basic education and the 4 million in higher education. I don't think the government schools would be able to accommodate all of these students without the private education sector. In basic education, the private education institutions account to 16% of the entire enrollment in the country. That's around 4 million students. But in higher education, the private higher education sector accounts to 55% of the total enrollment. So I can just imagine, even when the government spends for student subsidy for students to enroll in the private schools, it actually saves on costs of putting up more classrooms, constructing more facilities, even training of teachers. So I think this is where one aspect of complementarity comes in terms of funding. But of course, policy also providing a level playing field, making sure that we have academic freedom for higher education institutions and basic education are also given some latitude in terms of coming up with their school policies. So all of these come together and they are under that complementarity principle under the Constitution.
So you're saying the private sector can be more efficient or does it more efficiently in according to, at least you said, your studies?
Yes, definitely. And then actually what we're thinking is that the private education should be given more roles in terms of providing quality education, because the private education is more advanced in terms of innovation, creativity, and also in terms of quality. And that is an aspect where the public education system could really benefit. So in some countries, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but wearing your hat as a lawyer, how do you answer the critics who say that they have problems with government subsidizing private businesses because that's what they say private schools are, without, of course, adding that many of them are not for profit or religious foundations. But what does the law say about government helping out private institutions?
Yeah, actually, contrary to this popular assumption that there's a constitutional prescription on funding of a private entity, that government money shall be used only for public purposes. This is actually a COA. This is an audit. This is a provision
Audit
in
finding.
the audit law, on the audit law of the Philippines, not in the Constitution. That's the first thing. And the second of all, even if you have that provision, education satisfies that public element, because again, education is a public good, whether it is offered in public or private education institutions. And I think we also have enough regulations in place to make sure that education delivered in the private sector is not abused and not reduced to a business, because running a school is not really a business. 70% is required by law. 70% of the tuition is required by law to be allocated to school personnel. 20% up to 30% should be used for facilities and other needs of the school. So there's very low margin for profit or return of investment. So if you're really into education, if you really want to profit, I don't think you'll go into education. It should be more than that.
You were saying earlier something about level playing field. How is the field unlevel right now? What are some of the challenges and what are the remedies that Cocopea is proposing?
Oh, that's a very long discussion. We'll talk about
let's say the unlevel playing field. What are some of the points? I know that Cocopea has made statements, for instance, about the rising pay for public school teachers, and of course, no one argues that teachers deserve good pay, right? But there's more to that. But maybe you can give Cocopea's part.
Yeah, but first of all, when we talk about leveling of the playing field in terms of policies, I think the
Mm.
major difference of, uh, of regulating public schools and regulating private schools is a lack of accountability mechanisms
Mm.
in the public education sector, more than what we're experiencing in the private education sector. You see, if you establish an educational institution, if you establish a private school, you are first you have to get a permit from either DepEd or CHED in order to operate the program. And even once you get that recognition, once you get that permit, you are under constant monitoring, etc., regulatory powers, administrative powers of these agencies. And if you fail to satisfy that, you'll be closed. So you are
Mm.
under close scrutiny. There's regulation.
And
But in terms of for
public schools don't have that.
they don't
That
have
type
that.
of oversight. Okay.
They don't have that because under the law, this is a very old law, the Education Act. The government schools are established by law, created by law, and the program offerings are automatically authorized or granted simultaneous to creation. Unlike in the private education sector, you have to establish based on corporate or SEC rules, but the offering of the programs, you have to get it, you have to apply for it. And then, of
Mm.
course, the power to grant includes the power to withdraw. And so there's a constant regulation. So I think that's where the unlevel playing comes in. You have different dynamics and issues in its implementation. But I think that's the cause of the unlevel playing field. I
I
think if we put in place some quality assurance measures also in the public school system, I think the quality of education will really improve in our country because public and private institutions would compete in terms of quality, not in
Right.
terms of government support.
So how come that is not happening? What is the where's the resistance coming from? Is it bureaucracy? Is it in the legal side? Yeah, because nobody can argue about quality. I mean, parents who send their children to public schools, whether in basic ed or in higher ed, of course they want their children not only to have the academic degrees, but also all of the perks that come with a degree, such as employability and productivity of that person. Why is it not happening? Why is no one imposing these higher standards of quality, as you said, on the public side?
Yeah, I think because our major problem before are on the access of
Mm,
students to education. So I think we were burdened by that. Our government has to prioritize that, has to make sure first that it is able to reach out to school children of school age and make sure they go to school, providing more public schools for them to reach those who are hard to reach in the parts of
mm,
the country. And only now, in the recent years, especially when we passed this K to 12 law, it is only now that we are also made aware of serious concerns on quality. And in fact, before the ECQ, we're having some development in this aspect in terms of the legislature addressing this policy concern. March 5, we had this hearing at the Senate with the committee chair, Committee on Education chair, Senator Gatchalian, Win Gatchalian. He called for a hearing on complementarity of education. So we were all there, the private education representatives as well as officials of the public school system. So we were talking all about this, but again, suddenly the ECQ happened. But I
mm,
think that dialogue should continue.
mm. And I think some people may be surprised that the private sector, through the initiatives of Cocopea's former chairman, Father Joel Tabora, now the president of Ateneo de Davao, had actually started dialogue also. Is that correct? With the private sector and state colleges and universities. Can you tell about that? That is continuing now, even after Father Joel's term as chairman, right?
Yes, that is one of Father Joel's legacy in Cocopea, providing a platform of conversation and dialogue with the higher education institutions, the state universities and colleges, and the private higher education institutions. So we were talking about matters where we can complement each other's efforts and how we can maintain the same level of quality across education institutions, which is actually very good. And we're continuing with that dialogue.
Right, and in the few meetings I've attended in that dialogue, I got the impression that the SUCs are very willing to work with the private sector. In fact, some of the private sector's positions are very similar to the concerns also of the SUCs. Is that your impression as well?
Yes, that's correct. One of the major achievements of that dialogue is that their agreement to focus on the agreement of the SUCs to focus on courses and programs that are needed by the country, but not necessarily popular to students or are of commercial value. Because they don't need income from tuition because they're fully tuition funded,
Right.
and they can actually continue with courses that are unsubscribed
Right.
in the recent years, which also the private education sector cannot just offer because again it relies on tuition funding. So
Right.
if it is unsubscribed, it cannot continue.
Right. I'm going to put you on the spot here. So the problem is not with the private sector. The SUCs are receptive to your ideas. Maybe the problem is with Congress or somewhere else in government.
That's always part of it because state universities and colleges it is also governed by its own charter. They
Right.
all have their own laws, and of course they're also into political districts.
Right.
And a lot
Right.
of the has
And it's not
something to do with their operation.
and it gets more complicated because it's not just one level of government, like the national government that looks after SUCs, but also local governments with local colleges. And sometimes, you add them to the mix and you have a much more complicated situation. For instance, in Manila, you have PLM, you have Universidad de Manila, and both city colleges, but they're seem to be offering this similar subjects or similar degrees, and then on top of that, they seem to be also competing with private schools also in Manila for the very same areas or branches of discipline. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any complementarity at least in Manila where I'm familiar with.
That's correct. We're hoping to also to bring into that conversation the local colleges and universities. In the local government education also has a different policy environment because putting up an education institution in the locality is also one of the revenue sources of a local government unit, which also is part of the powers and functions of the local government. But they have to also take into consideration the role of the private education institutions in their communities. Sometimes the local schools are situated right in front of the private schools and are competing with students and then depriving the private schools of its needed resources in order to thrive because again it is fully tuition funded.
All right, but how do we solve the case, for instance, and I don't know how unique this is, for the case of, for instance, of UP, which is, a public institution, and by mentioning that, my understanding is that it should benefit the most deserving of the people who can't afford a good education. But a school like UP, because of the quality it provides, attracts many more students who can actually afford to pay tuition in Ateneo or La Salle or some other public university aren't underprivileged but deserving students being crowded out of that school?
Yeah, that is really a major issue, not only in UP, but this is also happening in other state universities and colleges. This is one issue that this law, RA 10931, the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education, also intended to address that those deserving, qualified students should be prioritized, and that those who can afford should not be getting the slots of the poor and deserving students. But I think in UP, it's very hard to implement that for some reason. But
Yeah,
yeah, this is being addressed because of that law now.
yeah. The
Because the
joke
problem
there.
is when the those who can afford crowd out the poor students. The poor students are forced to the private education institutions, and when they cannot pay, it becomes a problem
An issue. Yeah.
also in the institution, and it becomes also unpopular when private schools complain that students are not paying, right? So paying.
Mm.
So yeah, it goes hand in hand in resolving this problem.
Yeah, maybe if we can talk about that a little bit because people seem to have a negative reaction. They cringe a little bit when schools try to impose a no permit, no exam policy. But you know, a lot of them conveniently forget that the private schools have to pay salaries, have to spend on facilities, have to invest on growing those facilities, and of course, the government doesn't give them money. So how can they do those things, deliver quality education if there will be laws like no permit, no exam that will essentially undercut them.
Yeah, quality education has a cost, as we all know. And if the students are not willing to pay, or if the schools are constrained to offer education only at the minimum cost, then we will not be able to innovate and deliver quality education beyond what the government prescribes in its minimum standard. And I think this issue on payment of tuition should be resolved in the respective schools, and should not be subject of legislation, because if a legislation is passed where schools are prohibited from withholding or refusing exams because of unpaid tuition, even those who can pay would no longer pay,
Mm.
and of course this will cause the more problems, viability problems for education institutions if nobody pays their tuition.
Right. Right, and to be clear, and I think a lot of people don't understand this. The assistance to private education, most of it, I think, through the voucher program, does not go to the school. It goes to the students. Is that correct?
Yes, these are tuition subsidies. So it's actually for them, but
Hmm.
it is released to the school to make sure that the school is also paid. Because if you
Yeah.
release this directly to the students, they may not pay the schools and use it for some other purpose.
Right. So the problem in many schools, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the value of those vouchers are in many cases not even sufficient to cover the tuition. Is that correct?
That's correct, because especially in basic education, it is not meant to cover the entire tuition of the students, but merely provide for subsidies. So those who avail of these subsidies are usually those who are in the poor mission schools, or those who are also in the lower income bracket, and not those who are enrolled in the bigger schools.
Mm. And how is the targeting done for those voucher systems?
It is actually based on first is the available budget for the number of slots.
Mm.
Then of course from there, there will be it will be based on the economic or financial background of the families. But not only that, one major element there is that the school should be able to meet certain minimum standards of the Department of Education, as enforced by the PAC, the Private Education Assistance Committee.
So there are conditions. It's not just it's not just a flat out subsidy. But are you saying they have to do well in school? Is that correct?
Yeah, the students should do well in school, and the school should also do well in the delivery of education. Because otherwise they'll have to return the money, and the students will also be disqualified if they don't perform well.
Can you elaborate on that? What does the school have to do to qualify in receiving those or being part of that voucher system?
Yeah, basically they have to maintain a good standing as a recognized basic education under the Department of Education, and that they should also make sure that the slots given to them for students are fully utilized. Otherwise, they won't be given the same number of slots anymore, or it will be given to other institutions. So basically, that's what they have to do.
Yeah, and you said that there was a delay. There's always a delay when it comes to the government releasing funding. But have they released the funding for those, for at least for the 2019-2020 school year?
Yeah, at least for last school year, that's already been released. There were some delays, but I think it's safe to say that for the last academic year, for the vouchers, they have already been released. But I think one subsidy related to that, which is the teacher salary subsidy, because teachers who are teaching in these accredited institutions, they're also receiving a subsidy. It has not been fully released yet. They're also waiting for that.
All right, and I guess that's just a function of the government being bogged down with the pandemic, or is that just the regular bureaucracy that you guys face every year?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, so we're hoping that it will be released soon. This is for the teachers who are teaching in the private schools and teaching in GASPE schools. So we hope that this will also help in alleviating their situation right now.
Yeah, I only have a few minutes left, but I just want to ask. So, public schools are supposed to open August 24, and they're supposed to be starting the enrollment. What about the private sector? Are you guys doing the same now?
Yeah, where preparations are starting yesterday and today for the school opening. So I think one of the priorities is disinfecting and cleaning the schools so that the skeletal workforce will also be secure in terms of their health, and then putting in place the facilities and probably online also services to do the enrollment registration, because of course the students would not be required to go to the schools to do the enrollment. So things like that. Prior to the COVID-19, I remember prior to school opening, the preparations are really into the physical facilities and preparation of the students reporting during the first school day. So coordination with local government, etc. But now it has evolved into something else. Preparation more on not allowing or at least reducing the physical requirements, not only of students but also of the school personnel in going to the schools. So technically, all schools are now allowed to do the enrollment first day of June. And
has there been any reports of schools that saying that they will not reopen because of business reasons, because they've been hit harder than other schools by this economic fallout?
Yes, there are several schools who approached me and the law office also in asking for help on how to close the school and what do they need to do to implement the closing. It's very unfortunate.
Wow, and that's because of the pandemic.
Because of the pandemic, they're not expecting their enrollment to improve, and that a very small number of students, it will be impossible for them to continue.
How many schools are we talking about? Is that something that you can disclose, or maybe where these schools are at? I mean, probably not Metro Manila.
And they're not in Metro Manila. But in terms of the number who approached me, there's a very small number. But when we did this survey, there's a big chunk of private schools who are saying that their resources can only last for 3 months. That was in May, starting April. So if there will be no government intervention, economic intervention, and based on their current resources, and the school would not be opening soon, they're really considering closing.
Wow.
So there's also around more than 40% of those who participated in the survey.
And how many participated in the survey?
Basically, majority of almost more than half of the Cocopea institutions. Cocopea is composed of 2,000 member institutions.
Wow, that's really bad news. Well, I hope that there's some relief to their distress coming soon. Any other issues that you want to discuss with regard to education that I have not asked?
Probably just take this opportunity to to appeal to our legislators and to the government for support on behalf of our school personnel, because they have not been able to get financial support from the government from the start of the ECQ. The first assistance, the DOLES camp, should actually be given to all employees affected. The school personnel were not able to avail of that benefit, and when it was transferred to the Department of Finance under the Small Business Wage Subsidy, they were not also able to get, and the DOF categorically said that education is not one of the sectors and industries prioritized. So we're hoping that with all of the positive developments, especially in passing this economic stimulus bills, extending the Bayanihan to Heal as One Act, that education will be included also in the alleviation measures of the government.
Wow, and good luck. I hope that happens. Well, thank you again, Attorney Estrada, for your time. And please let us know if there are other issues that arise later on that we should be paying attention to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, partner, and to everyone at the Manila Times. And keep safe, and hope to see you all soon in person.